So as we look at this, we can use these two elements to further dive into our analysis of our process. Let's do another example, and I think it's going to hit home for us. Let's say we work at Cool Dudes Pizza, right? And Cool Dudes Pizza, their process where they make spaghetti or pasta and pizza. And basically, the mean for our preparation bake time for pizza delivery is 19 minutes. We have a standard deviation of 2 minutes. And what is the performance of a 23-minute prep time? Sometimes people get confused with this, so I just want to kind of help you out here. This is going to be your X variable. That's going to be your observation. What's the probability that we'll hit that mark? So I'll go ahead and let you guys pause the video and solve this. We're going to use this equation right here as equals x minus mu divided by sigma. So as we dive into this, remember our z value and p value can help us determine what our performance or proficiency is in our process. So we'll go ahead and label our variables here. I've got x, or well, I'll start at the beginning. So I have, so we have our mu I know that's going to be 19 minutes. I have our standard deviation. And then that's going to be 2 minutes. And I have our x value. Is going to equal 23 minutes. Well, when I bring this all up here, I have essentially z equals x minus mu divided by the standard deviation. So when I do this, I find 23 minus 19. I get a value of 4 over 2, which is just going to equal a z-score of 2. From there, I'll take that z value and go down, okay, right there, and then I'll move over to the right there, and I'll find that my z-score is going to be a p-value of 0.500 plus 0.4772, which when I do that, I get a probability of around 97 percentile, 97.72%. Now, that's the percent of what? Well, hitting that mark. Now, remember, as we were drawing this out, you might ask, Zach, why did I put in that 0.50? Well, the reason I did that is because of the distribution. Notice this only shows 1/2 of it. It does not show the other 50%. So as we draw this, this then becomes that 50% or 0.500. And then we add it to our p-value of 0.4713. And that's going to be our z-score of up to here, right? So that's the probability of hitting that round next time we get another pizza order. Are we going to be within that margin of consistent standards, excuse me. overall understanding probability and understanding if you roll a metric and it's the probability or likelihood that you're going to hit that target region. Now, when we talk about regression models in Lean Six Sigma, a regression is how we go about, looking at how things compare or relate to independent versus dependent variables. A regression analysis is a way of sorting out which of those variables does indeed have an impact on our process. If we look at a regression analysis, what's your relationship status? How does it evolve over a process, over a time? How does it relate to each other? There are two basic types of regression that I discuss in this. You have a linear regression, a simple linear regression. The lines are going to fit around, does the data points fit that line? And remember when we talked about a scatter plot, those data points related to that line. What's your trend here of that data? How does it relate to that signal line? Well, on your next analysis, the other one is going to be a multiple regression, where you're going to use multiple regression lines to understand the data. So this is where we're going to have different lines and see how they correlate to the different data points. For the most part, you're going to be using simple regressions. I'm trying to think you would, if you're highly involved with statistics, you'll use a multiple regression. I doubt you'll hand calculate it to this point, to be honest with you. But I do think that you'll have a simple regression. Greenbelts typically don't worry about regression, to be honest with you, just because it's more of an advanced concept even to begin with. But a simple regression, you remember the variable back in grade school, y equals mx plus b. As I impact the frequency, I guess like a concept here that I could use is, even though this says y equals mx plus b, that's for sloping a mechanism. Your y here can actually be the frequency of x plus whatever variation you have, right? If you input a different variable in that, or you change the time of x, or change the time of pizzas getting cooked, it's going to have an impact on the overall process. So you could say the frequency of x plus b is going to be your slope here. However, really what we're trying to find in this is, you'll have the data points, but what we want to see is how are they related? Are they dependent on that x-axis and y-axis? So a simple regression is a pretty easy metric to understand as we can understand and evolve our process. Later on in the class, we'll do this probably the next day. We probably won't get to it today just because I want to get you guys started on your projects. But when we look at a simple regression, just understanding how the data fits itself. A simple regression example. Marvel, they had a very good high run with Robert Downey Jr. playing Iron Man. Well, we can look at the variable of time that he was on screen and look at it as a y, an output of the revenue of the Avengers. So noticing the revenue, we could calculate and see what the degree of relationship between Tony Stark being on screen and the degree of relationship with the box office of success. That there was a strong dependency, and he kind of did carry the Marvel Cinematic Universe from the very beginning. And allows us to understand the data and how we relate to it. A multiple regression line, that's going to be essentially like we're cooking the pizza and we have the different variables in here. Now we can judge the significance of the impact, and basically in a multiple regression, what we're trying to do is find what's going to have the biggest impact. Well, in this situation, it would be based off of taste, and sometimes that's not a quantifiable metric, but we could determine what people like out of their pizza, what's their favorite parts, and then use a multiple regression and see how the data correlates back to that, right? So understanding the different variables in there and the different frequencies that coincide with it, we can do a multiple regression analysis. Overall, regression models help us see our variables and understand our processes. I want to show you an example of how to do a regression model in Excel. So when we open our tab and we look at a regression analysis, right, I have an example here. And in this example, I have the sales per year, right? I have the number of coupons sold, and I have the new customer emails. Now, we could relate this back to Toys R Us if you wanted. However, this was just kind of bit as a one-off scenario. In this, we want to see how the number of coupons we gave, did it have a strong relationship with new customers? Well, as you can see, when we look at this variable, can you see a strong correlation? Well, yes. There's a strong linear correlation to the number of coupons sold to the number of new customer emails that were given. And that's where we have our R-squared value. Now, I'll show you guys how to do this real fast. It's really relatively easy. But I'll go ahead and delete the chart. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight all of my variables. I'm going to leave the years out. Just because I know that's going to skew the data, and I really don't want to do that. You're welcome to put it in there and then manipulate it. But for simplicity's sake, we're going to highlight these two variables. And then go to Insert. From Insert, I choose a scatter. Right? So just kind of walk you back through that. Right? I highlighted my variables, the number of coupons, the number of emails. I then went into Insert. I then selected Scatter. From here, I can see a strong relationship as there's a linear progression, right? So we have essentially our number of coupons and our new customers. However, I want to see what the relationship or coefficient of the data points are. So I'm going to click on a data point, and I'll just zoom in so you can see it just a little bit better here. I'm going to highlight a data point, and I should have something called a trend line, right? So I right click on one of the data points, and I say add trend line. From add trend line, I then have the option to do linear, exponent. I can see the log, see where the projected aspect of it, the polynomial. seeing the route of the decrease in sales if you want to look at it from one of those perspectives. But I just want us to look at the linear model. I then will go down and I'll say display R squared on a value. This R squared value is going to be displayed as 1 for this scenario. You'll know if you've done a regression analysis right, because as your data gets clustered towards the center, your regression line is going to be fitting the data. So the regression analysis aspect lets us know that yes, there's the degree of relationship. We can see it in the data, but we want to see what the coefficient or the relationship mathematically is. And I'll just walk you guys through that just one more time so you can see it. But we have the number of coupons sold. We have the number of customers. I went to insert. I said scatter. From scatter, I just right-clicked on the data point and I said add trend line. From add trend line, I went all the way down and I say display R squared value. That gives me the coefficient of this data search, right? And it lets me know that yes, there's a perfect line and a direct correlation between these variables. Now, let's talk a little bit as we go through, because we want to get you started on your projects tonight, right? And so I've moved everything over that I think is very relevant. There was one thing that I left out, and that was a project charter. But as you guys are looking at this data and you've gone through the case study, you'll notice that the data information is on customer complaints here. This is kind of like that Kano, the defined phase of the metrics, right? I have the capacity where that's going to be the number of vehicles produced in each month. The personnel utilization. This was to more or less look at it from an operation efficiency. So we use 80% of our workers here, or essentially you could say 80% of the time they're working, 20% of the time they're on breaks or doing some other stuff, right? Your equipment utilization, this is where you can call operation equipment efficiency. So we look up at what their operation uptime is, right? So, at Ford's process in January, we had about a 75% uptime, right? And you have a 78% uptime here, number produced. Now, I could do the same thing here if I wanted to look at and do a regression model here. I could do the same type of thing, where I view the data. Oh, I think you have to go yeah. I could do a regression model and see that there is kind of a correlation. I'll see if I have a trend line. Yeah, there's a positive correlation. It's not that strong. And I can tell that in the data because it's only like 44%, right? So, is the equipment utilization impacting the number of vehicles produced? I mean, yeah, but there's a lot of leeway, and a lot of that's just because we don't have enough data to draw a conclusion. So in that, I'd probably want to collect more data if I could. This is the part where I think, having those formulas tonight will help you, is kind of setting up and doing these calculations, right? What is the defect of calculations? What's the yield percentage? And what's the DPMO? And so you'll see here I have formulas in here, but I want you to relate it back with a lot of these other variables I've given you too in this chart. You should be able to knock out through tonight a project charter, at least just start there. Start with your project charter, and then that kind of will allow us to use this data to formulate where do we want to go with this process. And between the case study that you read last week and then this file, you should be able to look at everything in one spot to be able to form at least a project charter. From that project charter, you should start your data collection analysis, and you'll be able to do that here with some of the items I have. Now, we'll talk more about this on Thursday, but the remainder of the class tonight will be creating a project charter, going through that define phase, identifying what those critical to metrics are, right? What those are critical to quality, the voice of the customer, and understanding those aspects of it. And so we can use the define phase and the data that we collected on the measurement phase, and then we'll go into the analysis phase on Thursday, and we'll start diving and using the tools of Six Sigma to really dive deep into this process. So the expectations tonight are you guys will be set up in your project groups, and from your project groups, you guys will then work on your Ford case study. The expectations leaving tonight should be to, at minimum, have the project charter completed. And then start your data analyses. So Thursday, we can go into the root causes and using the analyze phase to bounce off of these metrics.